My name is Clara Vance, and for the past 4 years, I have been living a life entirely separate from the one my family believes I lead. I am 29 years old, and the secret I carry feels less like a weight and more like a garden I've been tending in a hidden valley, a place of vibrant, fragile growth that I feared would wither under the frost of my family's expectations. In the world of the Vances, a world carved into the stately brownstones of Boston's Beacon Hill, success is a currency measured in legacy. It is the echo of your name in the hallowed halls of Vance and Sterling, the investment firm my great-grandfather founded, a name polished to a high sheen by the generations that followed. It is not, and has never been, about the quiet, uncertain joy of creating something new. At our annual autumn gathering, a tradition as unyielding as the New England winter, my Aunt Vivian's voice, sharp and delicate as a shard of ice, sliced through the warm hum of the dining room. "Still finding your footing, dear?" she'd asked, her smile a masterpiece of polite concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. What my family didn't know was that my footing was more solid than any of them could imagine. It was planted firmly in a world 2,000 miles away, a world of my own making. This is the story of that world, and of the quiet collision that occurred when it finally met theirs. The Vances are not merely a family, they are a Boston institution, as much a part of the city's fabric as the cobblestone streets and the ivy-clad walls of Harvard. Our home on Louisburg Square is a museum of our own history, each room paneled in dark wood that smells of lemon oil and old paper. The air itself seems to hold the weight of generations, a pressure to conform, to fit into the gilded frame prepared for you. Growing up, I learned that being a Vance meant walking a path paved long before my birth, a prestigious preparatory school, an Ivy League degree in economics, and, ultimately, a mahogany desk at Vance and Sterling. My parents, Arthur and Catherine Vance, were the architects of this life for me. They were not unkind, they were simply devout practitioners of the family faith. My mother, with her impeccable cashmere sweaters and the quiet authority she wielded on numerous charity boards, was the very picture of Brahmin grace. She managed our family's social standing with the same meticulous care she gave her prized orchids. My father, as the CEO of the firm, was the keeper of the flame. He was a man of immense integrity and principle, but his world was defined by tradition, by the established order, and by an unshakable belief that the Vance way was the only way. Their love for me was deep, but it was channeled through a prism of expectation, a desire for me to reflect the legacy they held so dear. "Clara has a brilliant mind for analytics," my father would remark at cocktail parties, his hand resting on my shoulder with a proprietary weight. "She'll be a tremendous asset to our portfolio management team once she graduates from Dartmouth." It never seemed to occur to him to ask if portfolio management was a world I wished to inhabit. Then there was my cousin, Isabel. 2 years my senior, she was the daughter of my Uncle Robert, my father's younger, overtly ambitious brother. Isabel was everything I was not, poised, articulate, and perfectly aligned with the family's ambitions. While I was losing myself in books about astrophysics and the nascent world of computer programming, Isabel was spending her summers interning at the firm, her name already appearing on research reports. Isabel just secured the endowment for the Lowell Institute, Uncle Robert would announce at our autumn dinners, his chest swelling with pride. Youngest associate to ever lead such a high-profile acquisition. Uncle Robert sat on the board with my father, a partnership that simmered with a quiet, lifelong rivalry. He saw me as a curiosity, a mild disappointment. "It's a shame Clara doesn't share Isabel's drive," I once overheard him say to my father across the library, the scent of leather and fireplace smoke filling the space between them. All that intelligence, drifting into those digital hobbies. My grandparents were the twin poles of our family's history. Grandmother Beatrice was the matriarch, a woman of formidable will and unwavering standards. Her world was one of handwritten thank-you notes, proper decorum, and the belief that a Vance woman's primary duty was to be a credit to the family name. "Clara, darling," she would murmur, gently adjusting the collar of my dress, "your passions are charming. But a lady's accomplishments should be in the service of her community and her family." Her disapproval was never loud, it was a soft, pervasive disappointment. Grandfather Theodore, the patriarch who had expanded the firm into a global entity, was different. He was a man of few words, his presence a quiet, anchoring force. When I would try to explain a new concept I'd learned about neural networks or data structures, he would listen with a focused curiosity, his gray eyes thoughtful behind his spectacles. He never contradicted my parents' plans for me, but sometimes, in the depths of his quiet gaze, I saw a flicker of something else, not quite understanding, but a kind of knowing acknowledgement. The most consistent critic, however, was my Aunt Vivian. Having married into the Vance dynasty, she guarded its traditions with the ferocity of a convert. She saw my fascination with the digital world as a personal affront, a rejection of the values she had worked so hard to adopt. Algorithms and code, she'd sniff, swirling her Chardonnay. It's all so abstract. Real value, lasting value, is built on relationships and trust, Clara. Things you can see and touch. The annual autumn dinner was the stage upon which our family drama played out. It was a performance of success, where each member presented their year's contributions to the Vance legacy. For me, it was often a quiet exercise in deflecting and minimizing. When I was 13, I won a statewide science fair for building a simple predictive model for weather patterns. How clever, Aunt Vivian had commented, her smile thin. But your Latin grades are so strong. It's important to focus on the foundations. By the time I was 17, I was building small, functional applications in my spare time. These achievements were treated as quaint eccentricities. Clara won another one of her computer awards, my mother would announce with a strained pride, before quickly adding, and her paper on post-war European economic recovery was exceptionally well received by her history professor. The message was etched into the very architecture of our home. Our library, with its floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound classics and financial histories, contained not a single volume on computer science. The laptop I'd saved for and bought with my own summer job money was kept in my room, a piece of modern contraband in a house dedicated to the past. Technology was a diversion, not a destiny. A real Vance worked with capital, not with code. When I chose to attend the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it was a hard-won compromise. My parents relented only because of its proximity and its world-class reputation, clinging to the hope that I would enroll in the Sloan School of Management and eventually pivot back to the preordained path after getting this technological phase out of my system. For me, crossing the bridge from Beacon Hill to Cambridge was like stepping into a different atmosphere. At MIT, I could finally breathe. The air thrummed with a different kind of energy, not the quiet weight of history, but the electric hum of innovation. I was surrounded by people who saw the world not as a set of rules to be followed, but as a series of fascinating problems to be solved. My life changed the day I took a class with Professor Anya Sharma. She was a luminary in the field of data ethics, and her lectures were a brilliant blend of technical rigor and profound humanism. I stayed after class one day, my mind buzzing with questions about the societal implications of predictive algorithms. She listened intently, her dark eyes kind and perceptive. "You see the poetry in the system, Clara," she said, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Most students see the mechanics. You see the human story the data is trying to tell." Professor Sharma became the mentor I never knew I needed. She saw me not as a Vance, but as Clara. She introduced me to a world of venture capitalists who were more interested in the power of an idea than the pedigree of a name, and to innovators who were building futures I had only dreamed of. "In your family's world, your name is an asset," she told me once over coffee. "In this world, your name is what you build." My first attempt to build something was a humbling failure. During my final year, I co-founded a small startup, a platform designed to connect local artists with micro-patrons, allowing people to fund specific creative projects. I was idealistic and passionate, but I was also naive. I poured all my energy into the elegance of the code and the user experience, but I failed to understand the complex web of financial regulations and payment processing. The platform never truly got off the ground, and we quietly folded it after 6 months. The call home was excruciating. My Uncle Robert's voice was laced with a triumphant, "I told you so" pity. "This is precisely why we stick to our knitting, Clara. The world of finance is complex enough. Come home. Your father has a position waiting for you. It's time to put this experimentation behind you." His words, meant as sound advice, felt like a judgment. The following year was a long, gray winter of the soul. I rented a small, bleak apartment in Somerville, the windows looking out onto a landscape of brick walls and bare trees. I felt adrift, the silence of the apartment amplifying the loud chorus of self-doubt in my head. Had they been right all along? Was I just a dilettante, chasing a fantasy while a perfectly good reality waited for me back on Beacon Hill? The fog began to lift on a cold, rainy night in March. I was woken from a restless sleep by a dream, a vivid, detailed dream of the Boston Athenaeum, the private library our family had been members of for generations. In the dream, a water pipe had burst, and the priceless, irreplaceable archives in the basement were being threatened. The alarm systems were failing because they were designed to detect fire and theft, not the slow, silent creep of water damage. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart pounding. And then, clarity. It was a metaphor, a perfect one. The world's most valuable assets, not just financial, but cultural and historical, were being protected by systems that were decades out of date. They were built to guard against the threats of the past, not the complex, insidious threats of the digital future. My unique upbringing, my fluency in the language of both legacy institutions and cutting-edge technology, gave me a perspective that few people had. I understood the value of what needed protecting, and I understood the tools that could protect it. A fire was lit within me. For the next 2 weeks, fueled by coffee and a fierce, newfound purpose, I barely slept. I mapped out the architecture for a new kind of company, a company I would call Aegis Digital. It would be a digital guardianship, using a sophisticated, adaptive AI to protect high-value digital assets, from the sensitive archives of museums and universities to the proprietary data of financial institutions. It wouldn't just be a firewall, it would be a living, learning system, capable of detecting and neutralizing threats before they could even manifest. With a clear vision, I sought out a team. I didn't look for polished resumes from big tech firms. I looked for brilliant outliers, people like me who didn't quite fit the traditional mold. There was Cale, a self-taught coder from rural Maine whose genius was only matched by his shyness, Maya, a former archivist with a PhD in digital humanities who understood the soul of the data we were protecting, and Ben, a user interface designer whose minimalist aesthetic had been deemed too esoteric by his previous employers. "We're not just building a security company," I told them in our first meeting, gathered around the rickety table in my apartment. "We're building a sanctuary for the world's most important stories." We built the first prototype from my apartment, using refurbished servers and cloud credits I bought with the last of my savings. All the while, my family believed I was on a prolonged sabbatical, working a freelance consulting gig while I figured out my next move. Our moment came when I managed to secure a meeting with Elias Thorne, a legendary angel investor known for his sharp intellect and his deep skepticism of hype. He was a formidable presence, his office a stark, minimalist space overlooking the Boston Harbor. "Your last name is Vance," he said, his eyes scanning my pitch deck. "Your family basically owns a piece of Copley Square. Why are you here, in my office, looking like you haven't slept in a week?" "Because my family, with all due respect, represents the past," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They are curators of a legacy. I want to be an architect of the future." He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he nodded slowly and said 2 words, "Tell me more." By the end of the hour, he had agreed to lead our seed round of $5 million. That day, I made a critical decision. Professionally, I would be known as C. Vance. It was a small act of separation, a way to ensure that our work, our success or failure, would be judged on its own merit. It created a quiet space for Aegis to grow, away from the long shadow of my family name. When the news of our funding round broke in the tech journals, I was able to deflect my family's mild curiosity. "Oh, that's just a small project I'm advising on," I'd say, and the conversation would move on. The next 3 years were a blur of intense, joyful work. Aegis Digital grew. We started with a handful of prestigious cultural institutions, universities and museums who understood the vulnerability of their digital collections. Our success with them became our calling card, and soon, financial firms, the very world I had run from, began to take notice. The team grew from 4 people in my apartment to 50 in a renovated loft in the Seaport district, and then to over 200 in a sleek office with panoramic views of the harbor. Through it all, I guarded my privacy fiercely. I let my brilliant team be the public face of the company, accepting awards and speaking at conferences. The few photographs of me that existed were artfully framed to obscure my face. I was C. Vance, the enigmatic founder of a rapidly growing tech firm. The call from the Sentinel Business Journal came on a crisp autumn afternoon, almost 4 years to the day I had sketched out the idea for Aegis. The journalist, a sharp and tenacious woman named Sarah Chin, had done her homework. She had connected the dots between C. Vance of Aegis Digital and Clara Vance of the Boston Vances. "We want to do a cover story," she said, her voice professional but with an undercurrent of excitement. "The story of the woman who is quietly building the future of digital security. The secret scion revolutionizing the industry from the inside out." I felt a wave of cold panic, followed by a surprising sense of calm. I had been hiding for so long, and I was tired. It was time. "I'll do it," I said, my voice firm. "But on one condition. You use my full name. Clara Vance." It's time for the whole story. The photoshoot took place in our office. I wore a simple navy blue dress, not the power suit they might have expected. The photographer captured me standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline stretching out behind me, a city I had both fled and returned to. The headline they chose was simple and powerful: Clara Vance, the architect of Aegis. How Boston's quiet revolutionary is securing the future. The magazine was scheduled to be released the day after our family's annual autumn dinner. I drove my small, unassuming sedan through the gaslit streets of Beacon Hill, the tires whispering over the cobblestones. The Vance house stood as it always had, a bastion of quiet, old-world elegance. The familiar scent of beeswax and drying leaves greeted me as Mr. Davies, our butler for as long as I could remember, opened the door. "Miss Clara," he said with his customary gentle nod. "The family is in the drawing room." I took a deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my dress. The drawing room, with its soaring ceiling and ancestral portraits, felt like walking onto a stage. "Clara, darling." My mother glided towards me, her pearl earrings gleaming in the soft light of the chandeliers. Her hug was light, a familiar scent of Chanel and affection. We were beginning to worry. The traffic must have been dreadful. My father, standing by the marble fireplace with a glass of sherry, gave me a warm nod. "Good to see you, Clara. Settling into your new apartment?" He still thought I was living in a small place in Cambridge. "Something like that," I murmured. Uncle Robert cut straight to the point. "I sent you that contact at Fidelity, Clara. Did you ever reach out? They're always looking for bright young analysts." "I've been focused on my own projects, Uncle Robert," I replied evenly. "Projects," he said with a dismissive little wave of his hand. "Projects are fine, but a career needs a foundation. You can't build a future on freelance work." Isabel approached, a vision of effortless elegance in a silk dress, her fiancé's family heirloom ring sparkling on her finger. She kissed the air by my cheeks. "Clara. You look well. We missed you at the Symphony Gala. You must let us know when you're ready to get back into the swing of things." The unspoken words hung in the air, "when you're ready to be one of us again." Isabel was just made a partner at her law firm, Uncle Robert announced to the room. The youngest in the firm's history. Now that's carrying on the family tradition of excellence. My grandmother, Beatrice, approached, her posture impeccable. Her eyes, still a sharp, piercing blue, took in my simple dress, my lack of jewelry. "Clara," she said, her voice soft but laden with meaning. "It is good to see you. Are you still keeping busy?" "Yes, grandmother. I am." Her slight, almost imperceptible frown told me everything. She patted my hand and glided towards her favorite wingback chair. Across the room, my grandfather Theodore caught my eye and gave me a small, almost conspiratorial, nod. It was the one anchor in the swirling currents of the room. At precisely 7:30, Mr. Davies announced dinner. We proceeded to the formal dining room, the long mahogany table a gleaming reflection of the crystal and silver that had been in our family for a century. I took my designated seat between my grandmother and Isabel, perfectly positioned to absorb the silent judgment of the past and the polished success of the present. The dinner conversation followed its predictable course. My father discussed the volatility in the Asian markets. Uncle Robert boasted about a recent acquisition. Isabel detailed a complex legal case she had won. "Those tech startups are finally facing a market correction," Uncle Robert declared, sending a pointed look in my direction. "It's all ephemeral, built on code and promises. No substance." I stayed silent, focusing on the delicate flavor of the butternut squash soup. "Clara," my mother said, her voice a little too bright. "Why don't you tell everyone what you've been working on?" The familiar dread washed over me as all eyes turned my way. This was the moment I had always hated, the gentle interrogation of the family misfit. "I've been working in the digital asset protection space," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Is that related to that little arts platform that didn't quite work out?" Aunt Vivian inquired, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "No," I said calmly. "It's a new venture." "What's the name of the company?" my father asked, his interest piqued for a moment. "Anyone we might know?" "It's still in the early stages," I demurred, trying to steer the conversation away. Isabel, ever the diplomat, smoothly redirected. "Actually, my firm is looking at expanding our cybersecurity practice. It's a fascinating field. We're focusing on integrating new tools to support our existing frameworks, of course." A measured approach. "Exactly," Aunt Vivian chimed in, nodding with approval. "Technology should be a servant, not the master." I tuned out as the conversation moved on, focusing on the rhythm of my own breathing. "Clara has always been so creative," my mother sighed during a lull in the conversation. "She just needs to find the right channel for it." "It's a matter of focus," Uncle Robert added. At 29, I was managing a $50 million fund. It's about committing to a path. "The world is different now, Robert," my grandfather said, his voice a low rumble. "The paths are not so clearly marked." "The principles of success are timeless," Aunt Vivian countered. "Hard work, a strong network, and a commitment to established institutions." As Mr. Davies began to clear the plates from the main course, Aunt Vivian leaned towards me, her diamond bracelet clinking against her water glass. "Still finding your footing, dear?" she asked, her voice laced with that familiar, cutting pity. "At your age, I was chairing my third major fundraiser for the Museum of Fine Arts." The table grew quiet. This was it. The moment of public assessment, the gentle but firm reminder of my failure to measure up. I took a slow, deliberate breath. "I'm not entirely without footing, Aunt Vivian." "Oh?" She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "And what would you call it? A hobby? A passion project?" Before I could form a reply, Mr. Davies re-entered the room, his timing uncharacteristically disruptive. He carried a silver tray, and on it was a single, glossy magazine. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Vance," he said in his formal, deferential tone. "But your subscription copy of the Sentinel Business Journal has just arrived. You asked to be notified." My breath caught in my throat. It was happening. Now. Not in a boardroom or an email, but here, in the heart of my family's world. The collision was imminent. Mr. Davies presented the tray to my father. The magazine was face down, as was the custom. My father, deep in a conversation about interest rates, took it with a distracted air. "Thank you, Davies. Now, as I was saying, if the Fed adjusts its policy, we can expect." He flipped the magazine over. And he stopped. The words caught in his throat. The air in the room seemed to thin, to grow still. One by one, the conversations around the table faltered as everyone turned to look at my father, whose face had gone pale. "Arthur," my mother asked, a note of concern in her voice. "What is it?" My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. With a hand that seemed to tremble slightly, he slowly, deliberately, turned the magazine around for the entire table to see. There I was. My face, looking not at the camera, but slightly past it, a quiet and confident expression on my face. Behind me, the city of Boston was a soft-focus panorama of steel and glass. And above my image, in bold, elegant letters, was the headline, "Clara Vance, the architect of Aegis. How Boston's quiet revolutionary is securing the future." A profound, unbroken silence descended upon the room. It was so complete I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My mother's hand, which had been reaching for her water glass, froze in mid-air. Uncle Robert snatched the magazine from my father's grasp, his eyes wide with disbelief. He scanned the cover, then looked at me, then back at the cover. This can't be." Isabel leaned over his shoulder, her face as white as the damask tablecloth. "Aegis Digital," she whispered, the name a soft puff of air. "Your C. Avance." "The C. Avance?" My grandmother's hand went to her throat, her pearl necklace a stark contrast to her suddenly flushed skin. "Clara. What is the meaning of this?" Aunt Vivian's mouth was slightly agape. For the first time in my life, I saw her utterly speechless. My father finally found his voice, though it was strained, unfamiliar. "Is this some kind of elaborate prank, Clara?" I drew a long, centering breath. The moment was not what I would have chosen, but it was the moment I had been given. "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the silent room. "It's real. The journal is on newsstands tomorrow. Aegis Digital is my company. I founded it 4 years ago." "Aegis Digital," my father repeated, the name foreign on his tongue. "The firm that the university just contracted for their entire digital archive security?" "That's you?" I nodded. "And the Boston Public Library. And 3 of the financial firms in your own building. We're currently valued at just over $850 million. The number hung in the air, an impossible sum. My mother's hand fluttered to her chest. You own it?" Uncle Robert stammered. "I'm the founder and majority shareholder," I confirmed. "I own 68%. Grandmother Beatrice stared at me, her composure finally cracking. "You have been building a corporation, while we believed you were adrift?" "Yes." "But why?" my mother asked, her voice filled with a genuine, wounded confusion. "Why wouldn't you tell us? We're your family." I looked at their faces, a gallery of the people who had shaped and defined my world. The faces that had offered love and support, but always within a carefully prescribed set of boundaries. "Because I needed to," I said softly. "Would you have understood? If I had come to you 4 years ago and said I was turning down a position at the firm to build a software company from my apartment, would you have supported it? Or would you have tried to guide me, to steer me back to the sensible path, to protect me from my own vision?" The silence was my answer. Then, from the head of the table, my grandfather Theodore spoke. He didn't laugh or shout. He simply cleared his throat and said, his voice full of a quiet, profound respect, "Well done, Clara. Well done indeed." He raised his water glass to me. "To the architect." The spell was broken. A torrent of questions flooded the space. "How did you? Why didn't you? Who funded?" I held up a hand, a gesture of authority that felt both strange and natural. To my astonishment, the room fell silent again. "I am happy to tell you everything," I said. "But first, I need you to understand. I didn't do this to defy you, or to prove a point. I did this because I had to. It was a story that I needed to write, and I had to write it in my own language." My father looked at me, his expression a kaleidoscope of shock, pride, and a deep, dawning regret. "We have a great deal to discuss." "Yes," I agreed, a sense of peace settling over me for the first time that night. "We do." Dinner was over. Mr. Davies and the staff, with an air of quiet discretion, cleared the untouched dessert plates while we all moved into the library. The magazine was passed from hand to hand, treated like a strange and powerful artifact. "It says here your proprietary system has a 99.9% success rate in predicting and neutralizing novel threats," Uncle Robert read, his voice tinged with an awe he couldn't conceal. "That's theoretically impossible. Our system doesn't follow a set of rules," I explained. "It's a neural network that learns. It recognizes the signature of a threat before the threat itself has been defined. It's more like an immune system than a fortress." My father paced in front of the unlit fireplace, running a hand through his hair. He kept looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You realize the implications of this, Clara. This changes the entire paradigm of asset security." "That was the intention," I said quietly. "I always knew you had a brilliant, unconventional mind," Uncle Robert declared, a stunning act of historical revisionism. "The Vance bloodline has always produced innovators." I offered him a small, knowing smile. "I seem to recall you advising me against my digital hobbies, Uncle." He had the decency to look momentarily flustered. "Well, I may have been overly cautious. A traditionalist viewpoint." Isabel sat on the edge of a leather armchair, her earlier poise replaced by a raw vulnerability. "So, last year, when I called you, so excited about making partner, you were already the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company?" I nodded gently. "I was." A deep blush spread across her cheeks. I must have sounded like such a child. "You sounded proud of your accomplishment," I corrected her softly. "And you should be. What you've achieved is remarkable. Our paths are just different." My mother sat beside me on the sofa, her hand resting on my arm as if to assure herself I was real. "But we could have helped, Clara. Your father, your grandfather, the connections, the capital." "And that's exactly what I didn't want," I said, meeting her gaze. "I needed to know that I could do it on my own. That my success or failure belonged to me, not to my last name." The truth of that statement settled in the room, a concept so alien to the Vance ethos. Aunt Vivian, who had been regrouping, finally found her voice. "Well, it just goes to show. I've always said that Clara had a unique spark." Her attempt to align herself with my success was so blatant it was almost comical. "Did you, Aunt Vivian?" I asked, my tone innocent. "What, specifically, about my passion for technology did you find so promising?" Her brief, sputtering silence was all the answer I needed. My grandmother approached me, her gaze steady and searching. "This company of yours," she said, her voice softer now. "I would like to understand it. I would like to see what you have built." The request, coming from her, was a profound concession. "I would like that very much, grandmother," I replied. For the next hour, I answered their questions, explaining the technology, our business model, our vision for the future. I felt like a translator, bridging the world of legacy and the world of innovation. "Why now, Clara?" my father asked, his voice quiet as the room began to empty. "Why reveal yourself now?" "Because it was time," I said. "I couldn't live two separate lives anymore. And Aegis is preparing to go public next year." The anonymity was becoming a liability. "An IPO?" Uncle Robert, who had lingered, practically vibrated with excitement. "Naturally, Vance and Sterling will handle the underwriting. I'll assemble our top team tomorrow. There it was. The inevitable attempt to absorb my world into theirs. Thank you for the offer, Uncle Philip, I said, my voice gentle but firm. But we've already retained a banking consortium to lead the offering. The decision was made months ago. His face fell. But, we're family. This should be kept within the Vance portfolio. Aegis isn't part of the Vance portfolio, I said, stating a simple, revolutionary fact. It's my own. Later that night, long after everyone else had gone to bed, I found my father in his study, sitting in his worn leather chair, staring into the embers of the fireplace. May I come in? I asked softly. He looked up, his face etched with a complex mix of emotions. Please. I'm sorry if tonight was a shock, I began. He held up a hand. No. I think it was a necessary one. He swirled the brandy in his glass. I am not angry, Clara. I am humbled. And I am trying to understand. You built this entire world without us. I built it because of you, I said, and he looked up, surprised. I inherited the Vance appreciation for things that last, for legacy. I just believe that in this century, legacy has to be actively protected and redefined, not just curated. You taught me the why. I just had to find my own how. He was quiet for a long time. I have spent my life managing risk, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. And it seems the biggest risk of all was failing to see the future sitting right across the dinner table from me. His vulnerability was a door opening between us. I am afraid, Clara, he confessed, the words a quiet revelation. Afraid that the world I understand is fading. And instead of learning the language of the new world, I just held on tighter to the old one. It's not too late to learn, I said softly. I can teach you. A soft knock came at the door, and my mother entered, her hair slightly mussed, her composure softened. She came and stood behind my father's chair, her hands on his shoulders. I owe you an apology, Clara, she said, her voice clear. I was so afraid of you failing, of you straying from the path that I thought would keep you safe, that I failed to see you were building a path of your own. I saw your passion as a risk, not a gift. I was wrong. Thank you, Mom, I whispered, a warmth spreading through my chest. We talked for hours, into the small, quiet hours of the morning. For the first time, they asked not about my career, but about my work. They asked about my team, my challenges, my dreams for the future. They were finally seeing me. The next day was a series of quiet conversations, each one a thread in the reweaving of our family fabric. Isabel found me in the garden, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. We stood in silence for a long time, watching the autumn leaves drift down. I was always so jealous of you, she finally admitted, not looking at me. I know that sounds insane. I had everything, the perfect track. But it was their track. You were the only one brave enough to go off-road. I thought you were lost, but you were just exploring. It was lonely out there, I confessed. There were so many times I wished I could call you. You can now, she said, finally meeting my eyes with a small, genuine smile. I might need you to draw me a map. The most profound conversation was with my grandfather. He asked me to walk with him down the long, gravel path to the old carriage house. Did I ever tell you about my wireless telegraph project? He asked, his eyes twinkling. I stared at him, confused. When I was a young man, just out of the war, I became fascinated with radio technology. I tried to build a service to transmit real-time stock quotes to subscribers. A financial information network, decades before its time. What happened? I asked, breathless. It was a spectacular failure, he chuckled. The technology was too primitive. My father, your great-grandfather, told me to stop wasting my time on childish fantasies and join the firm. And so I did. He stopped and turned to me. I don't regret the life I've had. But I do regret giving up on my own idea. I let someone else's definition of success become my own. He patted my arm. I've been reading about Aegis for over a year now. I had my assistant track every article on Advance. The initials weren't a very clever disguise. I was speechless. You knew? I knew you were on to something important, he said. And I knew you had to do it alone. Some things, a person must earn for themselves. The legacy of this family isn't the firm, Clara. It's the drive to build. You have honored that legacy more than any of us, because you did it your own way. 6 months later, I hosted the first ever Vance family dinner at my loft in the seaport. The space was the antithesis of the Beacon Hill house, all glass and steel and light, with clean lines and contemporary art from local creators. The dynamics had shifted. My father and grandfather spent an hour with my CTO, Cale, peppering him with questions about machine learning. My mother and grandmother were genuinely curious about Maya's work in digital preservation. Isabel announced that she was heading a new pro bono initiative at her firm to provide legal services to tech startups founded by women. Even Aunt Vivian had softened. It's all quite impressive, Clara, she conceded, looking around my living room. Though a bit minimalist for my taste. It was, for her, the highest form of compliment. The reconciliation wasn't perfect. There were still moments of misunderstanding, still echoes of the old patterns. But it was real. We were learning a new way to be a family, one built not on expectation, but on a newfound respect for our different paths. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I stood by the vast window, looking out at the city lights twinkling across the harbor. The vindication of success was satisfying, but it was a fleeting warmth. The true victory wasn't the magazine cover or the valuation. It was the quiet, unshakable confidence I had built within myself, one line of code, one difficult conversation, one brave decision at a time. I had sought their approval for so long, only to discover that the only approval that truly mattered was my own. The Vance legacy, I realized, wasn't a static monument to be preserved. It was a living thing, and it was my turn to add a new chapter, written in a language all my own. And in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the life I had built, I knew, with a deep and peaceful certainty, that my story was just beginning.